Okay, hi, assalamu alaikum everyone. This is the third conversation of the Cut from the Same Cloth series of conversations that I'm doing around this anthology, which if you haven't heard about it, you'll hear about it now. Today I am really excited. I'm going to be talking to Yvonne Ridley, and it's going to be really, I feel like we're going to cover a lot of ground considering the political moment that we found ourselves in. I'm just going to see if I can add her. So bear with me one second. Okay, so there's no user available, so I might just wait for her to join. Let's see. Well, anyway, in the meanwhile, I'll give it like a few minutes and then I'll try and request for her to join. But if you are there, Yvonne, then please request to join. So yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, this is an anthology of essays by Muslim women. It was edited by Sabina Akhtar, who I spoke to in the first conversation in the series 2 weeks ago. And I'm hoping to talk to as many of the essays as I can. I also have an essay in here. I think it's a fantastic anthology. The tagline is Muslim Women on Life in Britain, and it is literally as kind of broad as that. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this series of conversations was to give the different essayists a chance to talk really about the kind of breadth and range of things that Muslim women have spoken about in this book, but also that, you know, each essay kind of deserves the nuances, I think, to go into. It's kind of just a good reminder that Muslim woman is not one category or experience. Okay, I'm going to try again to add Yvonne. Okay. Bear with me. I know that she did say that her space on her phone sometimes gets full, so I'm just gonna do some live action figuring out what's going on right now, guys. This is all live and uncut. But in the meantime, if anyone's interested in buying the book, based on that very small introduction that I've given so far, you can find it at the link in my bio. And yeah, just bear with me because it turns out I'm not very good at multitasking in this way, so I'm just going to try and figure out what's going on here. Why do people do that weird high-pitched voice when you're trying to figure things out like that? What's going on here? Just Why do people do that? This is weird though. I'm not sure why her account has essentially disappeared. Or my internet's playing up. Aha! Found her. Here she is. Okay. Awesome. Inshallah, Yvonne, if you can see a little thing, yay!
Oh,
Assalamu alaikum.
sorry, this is a first for me.
That's alright. I'm glad you got here. I was worried that your account might have disappeared. I don't know what could have happened, but no, really happy that you're here. How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm fine. I'm just wondering if I should put this phone down
I
very quickly,
yeah,
otherwise,
I think you
there.
find that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Otherwise, you have to kind of hold it for an hour. Readjust.
Exactly.
That's fine.
Right. So are
We're
we
live
live?
right now. Yeah,
Oh,
so it's the way it works is it's quite weird on Instagram. We're already live. You might be able to, can you see people popping up at the bottom of the screen?
yes.
Yeah, so
Oh,
they're all people joining, ongoing. People might leave, people might come, and people are free to comment and ask questions. So I was just introducing the anthology in general. I was saying that this conversation is part of a series of conversations, and basically we're going to be talking about your essay in this anthology, your contribution, but also I think, considering the moment we found ourselves in, probably lots of other things as well. I
I'd
don't
better
think that
grab a copy of the book
you may well want to. Yeah. Should I let you do
because
that?
oh gosh, I've got wires and all sorts. You can tell I was brought up with typewriters, so I'm really sorry.
That's completely fine. That is all good. Do you know what I'll do? I'm sure people know who you are very well, but I'll read your little bio from the book, which sadly I only found out that the bios are actually in here today. So I feel bad for Khadija, who I spoke to last week, and I didn't give her a proper introduction. But whilst Yvonne looks for her book, for anybody listening in, Yvonne Ridley, for anyone who doesn't know, is a British journalist, committed trade unionist, and feminist. After becoming the first female editor of Wales on Sunday, she entered Fleet Street, working for several titles, including the Sunday Times, the Observer, and Daily Mirror, before joining Sunday Express. In 2001, she became headline news when she was captured by the ruling Taliban after sneaking into Afghanistan days before the US-led war in 2001. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that. A few expected her to survive, but she emerged unscathed 11 days later, released on humanitarian grounds. The Taliban described her as a very bad woman with a very bad mouth. 2 years later, she confounded critics by embracing Islam. In 2019, she wrote a book called The Rise of the Prophet Muhammad, Don't Shoot the Messenger, and in 2020, The Caledonians marked her foray into historical fiction. Yvonne helped launch the English language division of Al Jazeera in Qatar before returning to the UK for broadcasting startup ventures Islam Channel and Press TV. She's also contributed to BBC, CNN, numerous Middle Eastern broadcasters. In 2019, she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for work with Rohingya refugees and Syrian women prisoners. And in 2020, she was awarded an honorary doctorate in journalism by the International Academy of Diplomatic Action in Bern, Switzerland. So, mashallah, I'm sure you guys can tell there's a lot of things we could talk about today. Yvonne, if you have got yourself a copy of the book, I might just throw it open by asking you to read a little excerpt from your chapter, which is called The Global Revolution of Hijab, if I'm right. Yeah, The Global Revolution of Hijab. So I thought maybe to start the conversation, you could read a page or 2 pages of kind of any part of your chapter that tickles your fancy today, and we can just take our conversation from there if that works.
Right, okay. Moving from Soho to the Scottish borders, I soon realised the hijab would prove to be more of a negative distraction than a symbol of faith, especially after learning one local resident had already referred to me as Mrs. Al-Qaeda within a week. My hijab was soon replaced by a tweed cap and later a bandana, enabling me to go about my business unhindered. The hijab, you see, propels women onto the front line the moment they step outside their front door. It has proven to be a powerful, almost iconic garment that evokes all manner of reactions. Muslim women who wear the hijab are largely demonized or romanticized, mainly by men who cannot see the person beyond it other than in fantasies of their own making. It does provoke strong reactions, both positive and negative, and is in many ways a form of self-expression and a reflection of the political landscape. It is a strong symbol in the politics of identity, not only for the wearer, but for those on the outside looking in. For many years, I have investigated the bizarre case of the Pakistani-born Dr. Afia Siddiqui, who, in my opinion, is a victim of a grave miscarriage of justice, serving an 86-year sentence in the US following the alleged shooting of US soldiers in which no one was injured other than Dr. Siddiqui herself in 2008. She has now become a poster girl for just about every jihadi group in the world today who use her hijab-wearing image to rally people to their cause. What they never show is the westernized academic who graduated from MIT in Boston and happily posed for photographs without her hijab. Afia is used and abused by all manner of people who have their own agenda. As I portray her as a victim of injustice and the most wronged woman on the planet, someone else will change the narrative and present an image of a violent, convicted Muslim extremist. There are a variety of photographs that promote both images, with and without the hijab. Depending on people's own politics and understanding, a woman going about her business in a hijab can be viewed as helpless, vulnerable, and oppressed, someone who needs to be rescued. Paradoxically, the sight of a veiled woman can also evoke all sorts of romanticized fantasies about the wearer and what erotic secrets she is hiding beneath her scarf or niqab. Others simply see a religious fanatic and extremist. Images of hijab and niqab-covered women in bombed-out cities across Syria have emerged during the civil war, and these have been used by Western observers and supporters of the secular regime as evidence of radicalization of the wearing of the hijab in war zones, I believe, is because it offers some form of protection and security, real or imagined. During a visit to Idlib, the last rebel stronghold in Syria, in 2019, I was advised to put on a niqab and an abaya, not a garment I would normally wear. I felt it gave me a protection, limiting the danger of moving around in a war zone undetected for 10 days. And that's my 2 pages.
Thank you so much. I think those 2 pages actually cover a lot of the themes in your essay in general. And I suppose what I took from the overall essay, and which I think you quite well kind of captured there, is that you're talking about the way that hijab is used and has been used by journalists, by political, politicians, by for many different motives, whether that's geopolitics, whether that's to kind of make a statement or campaign in the cases that you mentioned. And I think in all of that, the experiences of women, like you mentioned, that it might be a pragmatic reason that somebody's kind of wearing a hijab in a certain style or a certain way. It might be any number of other reasons. And so I suppose, I think to begin the conversation, to kick it off, because there are lots of elements to this, it's useful to maybe just ask you, and you do talk about it in the essay, your experience with what, kind of how the world perceived you and how that changed when you began wearing hijab right at the beginning, and obviously the kind of backlash you got, I guess.
It was astonishing because, as you know, I'm fully aware that, I was born with white privilege and never expected to become a target of hatred. But the moment I put on the hijab, that's what I experienced. And, to the point where I was walking through Westminster one day and a man shouted, "Why don't you go back home?" And I was, never thought that I would experience this sort of hatred and Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And it gave me just a tiny insight into what others are experiencing on a daily basis, and it was quite shocking. Um, it's something that I didn't expect to experience, especially in a capital like London, which is,
Mm.
so cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
So it
I
was
think that's
quite.
no, it's interesting to hear that, because I'm just thinking, yeah, I think there is, even as as a visibly Muslim woman in the ways that I am, I think I definitely associate cities like London with feeling more anonymous and safer. But I guess what you're saying is just also a reminder that I think at some level, in an embodied way, when you're a visible representative of Islam in that way, in that gendered way, I think there is always that element that you carry of kind of uh yeah, of otherness, I guess. And I mean, there's at the very start of your chapter, you talk about this experience on the DLR, and some, you kind of notice people looking at you in this way, and you say that this is one of the first times that you kind of recognize this, which I found so interesting. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I was on the DLR, and this woman was giving me the evils, you know, sort of really laser eyes, and I'm looking around, thinking, you know, am I sitting in a disabled seat, or what am I doing? And I'm sort of, and I couldn't see what was wrong. And I thought, well, maybe it's just her. She's having a bad day. And then I looked over, and there's another woman who's also giving me the evils. And I'm thinking, you know, what is it? And when I got off the underground, I said to, well, it was the DLR, I said to my friend, gosh, I thought I was imagining it, and then I told her what had happened. And she said, oh, I see it all the time when I'm out with you. I'm amazed that you've never noticed. I said, noticed what? She said, people really stare at you and look at you in a hostile way. And I asked somebody else, another friend of mine, about it, and he said, well, it's because you're viewed as a traitor. You know, there you are, white woman wearing a hijab, and people identify so strongly with the hijab, and they see you wearing it, and it clashes with their views. So,
Yeah,
and
it sounds
I
like there is.
yeah, I was shocked by it, and that's, as I said, when I moved to the Scottish borders, where, you know, there are very few Muslims, I just thought, I don't want to experience this here. And then I'd heard that there was already one woman in the nearby village referring to me as Mrs. Al Qaeda. And it's, you know, what's wrong with people?
Yeah,
So
I think.
now I
Sorry, go ahead.
still cover, and
Yeah,
I've
I
got
think
a
the comment the sorry
stylish
keep talking
number.
over you.
So yeah, and you know, I'll sort of adapt to the environment I'm living in.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, and particularly the element of, I suppose, whiteness in all of this, right? Because I guess reading your essay amongst the other essays, it was interesting to think about the way that obviously some of the co-authors in the book, whether they, you know, whether I moved to the Highlands and wore a beanie or not, I'm still going to be racialized, I'm still going to be othered. And I think it's interesting to think about, I suppose, the way that being racialized via the hijab is this very quite a specific thing, right? Because even so, you know, my sister doesn't wear hijab, but she's still racialized, but in different ways to the ways that I specifically am. And then in your case, it's this interesting. Almost seems that this one. I think the thing you said about traitor was really interesting, right? Like this idea that I think. I think you said something in your essay which I found really interesting. That line, I really liked the line where you said something about, it says more about the identity of the viewer than the one being viewed. And I think I would kind of speculate that around seeing a white woman in a hijab, it's also this kind of disruption of the you know, the borders of the nation itself, right? Like, how do we understand Britain beyond whiteness if we see a white woman in a hijab and this doesn't compute for us? And at the same time, it's interesting to think about, you know, you do feel safer living where you are now without hijab because that racialization does sort of disappear. And I just wondered if you could, through your own experience, you know, all these years of kind of being white and being Muslim, and how, I don't know, just I'd be really interested to know a bit about kind of that, knowing that people aren't going to see you at first glance and think, oh, Muslim, knowing that that doesn't reflect anything about Islam or your faith, but also knowing that it does read into how people perceive you. And I'm just really interested by that.
Yes, well, I mean, it raises the question of what does a Muslim look like, you know, and I love the Malcolm X story when he went to perform Hajj, and he went there and was amazed to find such a diverse group of people that he was praying alongside. People with blue eyes, people with white skin, um, just a whole range of people. And it was then that he began to understand the whole sort of spirit of the brotherhood. and it had quite an impact on him. And when people say to me, well, you don't look like a Muslim, I'll say, well, what does a Muslim look like? We come in all shapes and sizes, all skin colours, all nationalities, all languages. You know, this is the beauty of Islam, the diversity. And so it can get frustrating when people try and put us all into one little box because we're quite diverse. I know as a journalist, it's quite difficult because you want to write about Jewish people, you contact the chief rabbi. You want to write about Catholics, you contact the Bishop in London or the Vatican office in Rome. You want to write about Christians and you contact the Archbishop of Canterbury's office. You want to write about Muslims. Who on earth do you contact? Because there are so many different organizations, so many different groups out there. And this, I think, is a problem. But, you know, there's no one person out there who can reflect and speak for all of us because we are so diverse.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know,
break our fast in Ramadan, you know, we can't agree on the moon sighting, and there's only one moon, and yet there are many opinions.
absolutely. And I think on that point that you just made about, you know, what does a Muslim look like? I think it's a good segue into, you know, the impact of the war on terror on what we perceive a Muslim does look like, right? And I think part of the reason that, you know, we know that the way that some of the sisters in the book will experience the Scottish Highlands or the Scottish border differently to the way you experience it is because of the war on terror. And that is because of the ways that the Muslim woman, in particular the veiled body, the hijabi, the niqabi, the burqa, whatever, has been so directly associated from the beginning. Don't know if you're still there, Yvonne, it's just loaded. Yeah, you're still there. So associated from the beginning by the media, by politicians, with either something that we've got to go and save, this just general symbolic significance of Muslim women. So you obviously were, you know, right there at the start. You've been covering all sorts of the, you know, geopolitics of the war on terror for all these years. And I know right now, you know, it's very hard to avoid that literally we're talking as things on the ground in Afghanistan are kind of being spoken about by lots of different, very reductive discourses, I'm sure. So I'd just be really interested to just throw that question open to you to take in whatever direction you want, really, just thinking about the role that the war on terror has played really in I suppose, globalizing this image of the hijabi woman as something both threatening and something to be saved.
I know sisters who removed their hijab when the war on terror unfolded, and gosh, when you think about it, 20 years ago, it was must have been a very scary time to be a Muslim. But I also know sisters who put on the hijab as a political act. When the US president at the time, George W. Bush, said, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists." I know one sister who was outraged by that statement. And so she started wearing the hijab. And her parents said, "What on earth are you putting the hijab on for? We've spent years trying to integrate with this community." And she said, "Because I want people to know I'm a Muslim. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not hiding it. And I'm damned if I'm going to have George Bush dictate how I should present myself to the world." And so the war on terror had all sorts of really personal impacts on individuals as Muslims. You know, some men grew their beards, others shaved their beards off. You know, it had a reaction with all sorts of people. But it has been tough, and I'm full of admiration for the sisters who have chosen to cover or have remained faithful to their hijabs, because as I said in the book, the moment you put a hijab on in Britain and step out in the street, you are immediately propelled into the front lines, whether you want to or not, and you're there short sword fighting in defense of Islam, just, you know, by stepping out onto the street wearing that hijab. And most times, inshallah, it is without incident. But then you get a politician, you know, our dear Prime Minister, calling women like letterboxes, making inflammatory statements, and it, you know, you get idiots listening to this, and then they see a woman in a hijab and they're triggered by it, and they can shout abuse or worse. So as I say, I'm full of admiration for women who wear the hijab and manage to get through just a day without receiving some form of abuse or some hurtful comment.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well because, you know, I think maybe in the public consciousness, I think we do talk a little bit about, you know, yeah, like one-off attacks or, you know, kind of people, Islamophobic hate crimes spiking and this kind of thing. But within that same continuum are, of course, legal bans on Muslim women wearing hijabs or niqabs or whatever else across Europe. And I know you write about that as well in the book. And, you know, I think that's something really important to acknowledge and recognize as, you know, state sanctioned controlling or undressing of women, you know, forcibly telling women what to wear. And you obviously talk about how in other countries it's the other way around, but in either case, women are being told what to wear and what not to wear. And I think it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on, you know, that state sanctioned level, right? It's not just on the streets. We've got politicians passing policy and laws that directly police what you can wear.
Well, let's face it, most of the comments about women wearing the hijab, how they should cover up, most of the comments come from men. And I would say this, and I've said it many times, get out of our wardrobes. You've no business being there, regardless of what beliefs you have. It is up to a woman how she wears the hijab, if she is going to wear the hijab, or if she's just going to put on a veil or a full veil. You know, whatever she decides, it is her choice, it is her right, and men should just get the hell out of our wardrobes. They've no business being in there, and you know, we could turn round and have plenty to say about their dress, because all the Holy Quran tells us to do is to cover. The rules of dress for men are many. You know, some colours are banned, some types of metal are banned. You know, gold is frowned upon on men. The length of trousers, oh my goodness, if you go onto some Salafi websites, it goes on and on and on about the length of somebody's trousers, and it's like, get a grip, get a life. You know, there's all sorts going on in the world, and these men are so focused on the millimeters above the ankle or below the ankle, and it goes on. And you see, coming out of the mosque on a Friday, men in tight jeans, which leave nothing to the imagination. Some of them wearing Versace t-shirts. and other t-shirts by gay icons, and you think, you know, these are the same men who say cover up woman, and there they are parading round in their tight t-shirts, their tight jeans. You know, look in the mirror before you start and address women on our wardrobes. Sorry, that
So
was a bit of a...
I think what's important to take from what you're saying there though is that I guess Muslim women, you know, we have it from all sides, right? We've got states legislating about what we wear. We've got journalists kind of portraying it in this or that way, and then we have, yeah, of course, Muslim men, non-Muslim men, Muslim men telling us what to wear or what not to wear or their opinions on what we wear. And I think, you know, as you mentioned at the beginning, that actually takes a lot to just go out in the world with a hijab on. Um, but I think in all of that, right, and like the thing that really frustrates me the most is that in all of these discussions about wherever it's coming from, the actual material realities of Muslim women's lives are completely overlooked, right? And I think what, you know, a lot of your journalism and your work over the past 20 years, I feel, has been much more invested in the actual material realities of women's lives and, you know, the actual things going on the ground. And, you know, you talk in your essay as well about certain situations, whether that's like Egyptian revolution or Palestine and different places where, you know, you make the point that wearing or not wearing the hijab is really at the bottom of the list of women's concerns. They want liberation, they want justice, they want, you know, different types of freedoms. And I think that is something that is so missed by the wider journalistic field. And I actually wondered if you could talk a bit about your experience as a journalist, you know, with this point of view, really on the ground as well, you know, really living with people, knowing people, how you kind of, yeah, I just, it must be unbearable, I imagine, kind of within the wider journalism field, kind of constantly battling or seeing these narratives and them ignoring that material element of people's lives.
Yes, it's very frustrating. I mean, we talked about, or I wrote about the Palestinian woman Ahad Tamimi, you know, a really courageous teenager who slapped an Israeli soldier across the face and challenged him over his bad behavior in Palestine. And she was locked up. They made her, they turned her into a cause célèbre. And of course, what did the media fixate on? Her wild mane of hair. You know, a grip. Why is this teenager challenging a heavily armed soldier? Why is she?
Absolutely.
There are so many important questions to ask
Yeah.
about Ahad Tamimi, and yet all they couldn't see past her hair on at the around about the same time. There was this wonderfully brave medic Najjar in Gaza who ended up being killed by a sniper's bullet fired from Israel. And again, the journalist fixated on the fact that she was wearing this bright red hijab, and I just thought, why aren't you writing about the fact that a medic, an angel of mercy, was shot dead while tending to the wounded? Who would shoot her? Why would they want to shoot her? How often does this happen? Why
Yeah.
is a woman who clearly is dressed in a medic's attire
Yeah.
put into the crosshairs of an Israeli gun? But
Yeah.
no, the
Absolutely.
media fixated on her hijab, just as the media at the moment in Afghanistan is fixating on the burqa, on turbans, on beards, stuff that really doesn't matter in the bigger picture.
I wonder if on that note, if I can ask you what kinds of, you know, because something I've been feeling as somebody kind of much less knowledgeable than yourself in this moment is that there are so many sort of reductive discourse. You can tell they're reductive, right? You're not sure exactly what it is that's the bigger version, but you can tell they're reductive, the discourses we're seeing about the Taliban in Afghanistan right now. And I think one of the things that I'm struggling with as well is seeing the repetition of these narratives that we've seen before about, you know, things are going to get so much worse for women, and the focus on women and girls, women and girls, women and girls. And I find it so frustrating because I want to I want to be able to hold the truth of, you know, not wanting women's lives to be worsened in any way anywhere, but also knowing that this is being weaponized for a certain narrative, potentially knowing that this is being viewed through the Western imaginary of the situation. And so I suppose the question I want to ask you is, what questions should we be asking right now? I think there's lots of, you've just said there's lots of questions that we're not asking, we're being told to focus on turbans, beards, etc. What questions do you think people should be asking in this moment?
How did the Taliban get to power so quickly? You know, if they're feared and brutal and evil, and they make women's lives a misery, how on earth did they get into Kabul and take control so quickly? There was 75 to 100,000 Taliban soldiers, and and there are 300,000 Afghan National Army soldiers. So the figures, you know, you look at the figures and you think, how on earth did they do that? They did it because there is popular support on the ground. Now, this is not what the Western journalists want to hear, but that is the reality. So instead, they fixate on women wearing burqas, or women not wearing burqas. And I was watching a news report from a satellite station last night, and the journalist was saying, oh, the Taliban have arrived, and he was braced and looking fearful. And he said, and yes, it's them, they've unfurled a Taliban flag. And I thought, well, what else? You know, if that is the sum total of the activity in Kabul. And then he said, it's quite clear that things are changing in Kabul. Everyone is wearing Islamic dress. And you're in a Muslim country, for goodness sake. That is what people wear.
Definitely. I think it makes it really difficult as a, you know, as a less informed observer to really everyone, I mean, not even just Afghanistan, but to understand anything when you're within the kind of the Western imaginary, the Western political context. And I think that's really interesting what you're saying. And I mean, I wondered if you could also reflect to us a bit about, and I'm sure you may be sick of talking about it, but, you know, about your own experience and your time in 2001 at the hands of the Taliban, and kind of, or just anything that subsequently kind of the thoughts that might have changed in you, or the kind of the, you know, was there a time when you also perceived kind of, you would have had perceptions about Muslims or Muslim women or whatever in the way that you are now able to see in other political observers, and I suppose what impact did that time have on you, if any?
Well, I told the truth, which nobody wanted to hear. You know, Britain and America had gone to war with the Taliban. You can't drop bombs on nice people, so you have to demonize them first, and then you can drop the bombs. And when I emerged from Afghanistan on humanitarian grounds, I was released. People wanted to hear stories of abuse, and they were quite shocked and angry when I said I was treated with courtesy and respect. It was the truth. You know, if I'd come out with a black eye and a hand missing, everybody would have loved me. It would have been, oh, you know, we'll turn her into a victim and you know, this is what the Taliban does. But when I came out and said, I mean, it didn't mean that I liked them or I supported them. I certainly wasn't their poster girl. They were so glad to see the back of me, because they, you know, I had been the prisoner from hell. So I just came out and told the truth, and
Mm.
nobody wanted to hear that. And I've never really been forgiven
Mm.
for that. And in fact, it probably would have been better for me if they had slapped me around first and then thrown me out, tied up and with a hood over my head. But that's what the Americans did to their prisoners, but the
Mm.
Taliban. So they treated me well.
That's really interesting. And even, even just hearing you sort of recount that there, you can kind of, I'm even just in the back of my mind thinking that's like, it's even quite, it feels disruptive for you to say that. It feels almost like you should, yeah, you should, you're not allowed to kind of have a narrative like that. And that is really, really telling. Just to anybody who's watching, I just want to say that we have about 20 minutes left, so do feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat or in the question box, which you can see where there's a little question mark at the bottom of the screen. And for those who are asking, I will be saving this to my Instagram feed, so you'll be able to watch it later or catch up on it. So going back to back to the essay, Yvonne, one of the other things that I guess we haven't really talked about, well, I guess you're touching on it right now, but I suppose to kind of go deeper into what you're saying, so I'm putting myself in your shoes, right? If I had been a journalist for as long as you've been a journalist, I feel like I would just be sick of, I just feel like how, it feels like there's such a systemic issue within journalism, within media in of itself. What keeps you doing the work you do, and how do you also retain integrity within a field that can kind of, I suppose, incentivize not telling the truth?
Um, I'm just an old-fashioned journalist, and I believe in delivering the truth, whether people like it or not. Um, and it's becoming almost like a revolutionary act now to tell the truth. And you know, people will ask me about my experiences at the hands of the Taliban, and I'll say to them, do you want the truth? And they say, of course. And say, well, you might not like it, but here goes. And I'll tell them, and depending which part of the world they come from, they will be happy or interested or absolutely furious. But I can only speak as I found, and the Taliban treated me well. And I am hopeful that the Taliban, who've now taken control of Afghanistan, will show a wisdom and maturity that was lacking back in 2001. And I really hope that they realise that we women are half the Ummah, and we gave birth to the other half, and we deserve a lot more respect than Afghan women have been shown, not just by the Taliban in the past, but by the Americans. They've been used and abused by the Americans, the British, the Europeans, every invading army that's been into Afghanistan. Oh, we're here to liberate the Afghan women. Well, those women should be among the most empowered in the world by now, because so many people wanted to rescue them. I just hope that the Taliban allow those women to flourish, to develop, and to contribute to the country, because you know what? Those Afghan women love the country just as much as the Taliban love the country as well. And if they can.
I've lost the sound. I'm not sure if anyone else has lost the sound there. Can anybody comment just saying whether they can still hear Yvonne?
can hear you now.
Oh,
The screen.
back. You're back. You're back. Yeah. Oh, okay. I couldn't hear you, but you're back. Hello? Hello? I think we might have a connection issue. We'll just hold on and see if she reappears.
I think the
Hello?
sound is gone. Maybe it's Insta's way of saying that they've heard enough of me.
Oh, you're back. You're back. We can hear you. If it's all right by you, I might just sort of whiz through a couple of the questions that have come up. You've actually addressed quite a few of the early ones here about how do you feel about what's going on right now situation. A question which I guess I'll just mention it, but I think you have just covered it. But sort of just saying, how do you reconcile different accounts or that Afghan women have that speak about their fear of the Taliban? And I suppose that feels like it also speaks to the question I was raising earlier as well about kind of not feeling comfortable to comment as an outside observer, because knowing that Afghan women's experiences are just kind of portrayed in ways that aren't to their benefit, but also knowing that there are different accounts and experiences, and not wanting to delegitimize genuine fears that are there. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
I think everybody who is fearful, I think their feelings are absolutely genuine. And part of it is rooted in the propaganda and lies that have been told by about the Taliban, but part of it is rooted in the bad behavior of the Taliban in the 90s. So, there is some justification for the fear, but I am hoping and I'm optimistic that the Taliban will start to prove people wrong. And it's only a matter of time before we hear that or see that. But I feel very sad for a lot of the Afghan women who were developing, who were flourishing, who were looking forward to a really bright future. I'm hoping their dreams won't be shattered. And I don't see why they cannot be allowed to contribute.
I think so, we just dropped you again there.
Right. Well,
that's okay. You're back. You're back. Sorry. No, but that was. I think we got the majority of that.
What I do know,
yeah, yeah,
every that I've ever met has been incredibly strong, and I'm hoping that they, now that they have had a taste of some empowerment, that they will be allowed to continue. And I don't think that they will let it go that quickly. But for the last 20 years, women have, a lot of Afghan women who have risen up have been betrayed. The youngest ever Afghan MP, Malala Joya, I had the pleasure of interviewing her a few years ago. She fled the country in fear of her life because she dared to call out minister under the Karzai regime. Suhaiyma, she had to flee later, but when she was made the Minister of Women, Britain was saying, oh, look, this is wonderful. The women have their own minister now. And when I went to interview her, she didn't even have her own office. So a lot of what the West did was
That's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. Okay, we have another question here. This is quite interesting. It says, Could you speak to the context of the climate breakdown, and how and if climate affects the ongoing struggles for Middle Eastern women's liberation, or women in the Middle East liberation? So I guess the impacts of climate and climate catastrophe on women.
The climate.
Yeah.
I'm not really a great expert on the environment, and it's something that I think I mean, I'm in my 60s now, and I think it's something that the younger generation is getting to grips with. And, you know, I think that hopefully, maybe it's a bit of a cop out from me, but I'm sort of more hopeful that the younger generation are really getting to grips with it, because my generation has trashed the planet, and I'm sorry.
I think it's corporations. It's not you. Don't worry. It's the capitalist world system. So I'll go easy on you with that one. There's a question here about. Hang on. Let me see. There's two parts to it. Are they ones? I'm not sure if. I'm not sure if you don't have to answer these questions. I'm just going to read what's here. So there's one that says, "What do you think of the Taliban wanting to ally with genocidal regimes such as the Chinese government?" So if you don't know if you want to take that.
Well, the Taliban have been talking to the Chinese, and I would imagine that the Chinese have probably said to them, "We will help you. Just don't talk or lecture us about human rights." And unfortunately, the plight of the Uyghur people is not going to be solved in Afghanistan. And Imran Khan, the leader of Pakistan, he more or less, you know, ignored the plight of the Uyghurs as well, because he's looking at the picture in his country. So it's not ideal, but the Taliban aren't in a position to help the Uyghurs, and neither is Imran Khan. And it's a very difficult one. I would go back to the United Nations and say the United Nations, if it is to become fit for purpose, has to get a global consensus about human rights, and make human rights an issue for everyone. Unfortunately, the United Nations, as I say, isn't fit for purpose at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, just to add another point as well on the, just for anyone listening who doesn't know as well, I mean, I only recently found out about the UK government under, I think it's under aid development kind of programs, sharing like security technology with the Chinese government to use in areas where we know that, you know, Uyghur people are experiencing absolutely inhumane conditions. And so just thinking as well about, well, if we have, you know, British government collaborating in something like that, you know, what is it that we're asking of other governments as well? You know, just sort of thinking through the whose silence is complicity, and whose complicity we see and whose we don't, I suppose. Just see if there's any other questions. People are asking about what reforms. What is it? Oh, well, okay. So two questions. One is, what is the latest update on Afia Siddiqui's case and situation? And another one is, would you ever consider revisiting Afghanistan and sharing your insight into women's issues, or I suppose, into having any sort of political input in the Taliban's position in Afghanistan? Speaking with them, I suppose, is the question.
Enough of Western interference, but it is a country that I do love. I will hopefully be going either later this year or next year, COVID permitting. And I will be linking up with women's groups. You know, women's rights are universal. And I've got my T-shirt on today, Fight Like a Girl. women's rights are as important in Kabul as they are in the Scottish borders, as they are east, west, and all points of the compass. And so women's rights will be, I would think, at the forefront of issues when I do go there, and show some sisterhood.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think everything that you've said today is also a reminder that, there is no such thing as women's rights without there also being every other type of rights, right? And, we don't end gendered injustice unless we end the other injustices that uphold it. And I think, in fact, everything you've said about Afghan women's experience is a great example that, women's experiences don't just get better in a silo. If your country is being bombed and ravaged, it's not, women aren't going to have an experience in a vacuum. Sorry, were you going to say something?
And as for Afia
yes.
Siddiqui, I would. There's some very bad news coming out about Afia at the moment, which I'm just seeking corroboration for, and that is that she has suffered a violent attack in prison in Texas from another inmate, and she's been nearly blinded. And I just think, how much more is this woman going to have to suffer? And that really is heartbreaking.
Yeah, may Allah make it easy for her. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think we'll wrap it up here since we're close to the hour. I just want to sincerely thank you. It's been such a really varied and really interesting conversation, and it's a pleasure to actually finally speak to you in person. For anybody listening who wants to know as well, we're talking about this anthology, and I mean, I didn't ask you actually, Yvonne, about kind of whether and what you see the importance of the anthology itself. And I think part of the series of talking to the different essayists is to also just say that Muslim woman is not one thing. It doesn't mean much beyond the fact that we all submit to the same God. And I think this conversation has been a really nice addition to that. And I'll be talking to different essayists every week, so tune in again next week. I think it's either Monday or Tuesday evening. I'll be talking to the next author, but I'll post on Instagram about that. But I'll leave the final word to you, Yvonne. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm so happy to finally have met you.
Yeah, well, I would say to everybody, buy the book. It's full of the opinions of Muslim women. Who knew they had opinions? Who knew they could write? Support us and buy the book. I think it's quite eye-opening. And thank you everybody for listening in. This is my first ever Insta-view, so thank you again, Sis, for introducing me to this.
Honoured to be your first.
Really enjoyed.
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to end this so you'll all disappear and you won't be live on anybody's screens anymore. So you're all safe. Thank you everyone who's tuned in. I'm going to save this to my story. You can share widely with friends and family.
Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.